At exactly 4:03 a.m., my phone buzzed loud enough to drag me out of the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. I was in the guest room again, where the mattress was thin, the lamp had no bulb, and the blinds never closed all the way. I hadn't touched her since June, not physically, not emotionally, but I'd made peace with the silence until that damn phone lit up. A single text from Rachel, 6 words. Relax, I'll explain. Be there soon. I stared at the screen like it had teeth. I didn't move right away. My first thought wasn't fear, it wasn't anger. It was, finally, like I'd been walking around for months with a loose wire sparking inside my chest, and this was the power surge that would blow it all open. She showed up 21 minutes later. I timed it. No makeup, hoodie zipped halfway, her hair damp like she'd either cried in the shower or didn't bother drying it. Both, probably. She didn't knock. She knew the code. She just walked in like this was still her house, like this was still her life. And without waiting for permission, she stepped into the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed like we were picking up a conversation that had only paused for a minute, not imploded for 6 months. I messed up, she said. I didn't answer. She sniffed once. Her hands were shaking. You're gonna hate me after this. I've been in the guest room for 41 nights, Rachel, I replied, voice flat. We're past hate. If you're still listening, go ahead and subscribe. I know over 90% of you don't, but it keeps our team moving and the stories flowing. And trust me, this one only gets worse. She took a deep breath like she was preparing to audition for sympathy, then started talking. Not like a woman apologizing, but like someone giving a presentation she had rehearsed a dozen times, like someone who still thought she could explain her way into a softer version of the truth. It started 2 years ago, she said. That was the first slap, not the affair yet, but the timeline. 2 years. 2, I did a quick calculation in my head. That would have been shortly after we started marriage counseling, back when I thought we were still trying, when I still showed up with a notebook full of intentions, and she showed up with silence and smug half smiles. You remember Dr. Elliot? She asked, voice tight. I raised my eyebrow. The marriage counselor? She nodded and then didn't say anything. The second slap landed. No, I said, you're joking. Rachel shook her head slowly. It didn't start like that. I was hurting. She paused, choosing her next word like it mattered. Vulnerable. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. Because somewhere in my brain, a switch flipped from pain to analysis, from husband to observer. This wasn't a confession. This was a script, and the delivery was clumsy. You slept with the counselor. She winced. We didn't mean for it to happen. Yeah, I muttered. Most therapists trip and fall into their patients. She started crying then, like that would soften the grotesque math of it all, like tears could subtract the part where I spent hours pouring out my fears in front of a man who was, apparently, plotting a side narrative with my wife behind my back. 2 years, 2, they were still going to sessions. Sometimes even after I stopped attending, just to help her work through things, she'd said. Sure. And I'd believed her. I thought he understood me, she continued, now pulling tissues from her sleeve like a magician. You never really listened. That was her line, her grand defense. I didn't listen. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even ashamed. She was angry I'd made her explain, angry the curtain got pulled back before she could control the reveal. So you were going to keep going? I asked. She looked up at me, finally recognizing the tone in my voice. Flat, hollow, no volume, just calculation. Her voice cracked. I don't know. And that right there was the first honest thing she'd said all night. Rachel talked like a faucet someone forgot to turn off. 1 hour, 43 minutes. I didn't interrupt once. She paced the room, her words swinging between self-pity and defensive righteousness, like if she kept spinning long enough, she'd turn it all into something noble. But it wasn't noble. It was clinical, planned. And when she got to the part about how it all began, it was almost laughably rehearsed. I was so lost after that second winter, she started, pausing dramatically by the window, like this was a therapy drama and not real life. You had gotten so quiet. You mean stable? I asked, more to myself than to her. No, she snapped, the first flash of anger cutting through her cracked mascara and faux vulnerability. I mean absent. You were so wrapped up in your routines, your work, your spreadsheets, your morning rituals. I felt like I was disappearing. And so, the counselor saw you, I said. Flat. I didn't even try to hide the sarcasm anymore. I wanted her to hear the rot in her own logic. He listened to me, she said, arms crossed. Really listened, not just nodded while checking your phone like you used to. I used to do that before our sessions. You know, the sessions you were turning into foreplay. She flinched, but I still didn't raise my voice. It felt pointless, like yelling at a haunted house. She wasn't defending an affair anymore. She was defending a new narrative, one where she was the mistreated muse and I was the cold-blooded statistician. I had given her no choice, she claimed. That was the theme of the night, the mantra, no choice. I didn't plan it, Daniel, she said, folding her arms. It just happened. But it hadn't just happened. She admitted they met twice after every official session. Coffee, walks, sometimes back in his office when no one else was scheduled. And yes, sometimes at hotels, but only when it was safe. Her words. What does that even mean? I asked. Safe? She looked at me like I was stupid for not understanding. Like when you were traveling, or when I told you I was visiting Mom. That part almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because of the sheer balls it took to spell out how little I mattered in the scheme of their little romance. And the sessions after I stopped going? I asked. Were those for closure? She nodded solemnly, as if that would make it dignified. He said we needed time to process. Together, yes, in hotel rooms. Her silence was answer enough. And still, no apology, just more narrative. He'd validated her. He opened her eyes. He unlocked a part of her she thought was dead. And all I could think was, this woman thinks she's giving me a gift by telling me this. Like she deserves a medal for honesty now that the ashes are already cold. Did you ever stop to consider the irony? I asked, finally standing. She blinked. What irony? That you had to betray me with the one person whose job it was to help us rebuild. Her expression didn't change. That takes a special kind of cruelty, I added. Weaponizing a counselor? That's innovative. She looked genuinely annoyed. You always use that tone, that sarcasm. That's what made me feel alone. I nodded slowly. Right. Not the cheating, not the manipulation. My sarcasm. She spun around, grabbing the tissue box and clutching it like a prop in some bad stage play. You're making this harder than it has to be. No, Rachel, you did that 2 years ago. The more she explained, the less human it all sounded, like she'd outsourced her conscience to a therapist who got a little too handsy with his client list. What struck me wasn't the betrayal itself, but how methodical it had been, like she'd filed it all under some internal justified folder and marked it resolved. I remembered a receipt from last Christmas, a hotel booking in the city. She told me it was a girls' brunch and gift exchange. I believed her. Hell, I even drove her to the train. She kissed me on the cheek and told me not to wait up. That night, I watched Die Hard alone with a beer in hand, thinking this is what a mature marriage looks like. Turns out I was just the designated decoy. I wanted to stop, she said eventually, voice small. But he told me you wouldn't understand. I turned my head slowly. He told you? She nodded. And you believed him? More silence. That's when I realized she hadn't come here to confess. She'd come to offload, to feel lighter. And maybe, just maybe, she thought we'd cry together, hug, and figure out a new chapter, like this was just an inconvenient truth standing in the way of her redemption arc. But I wasn't there to forgive. I was there to document the collapse. At some point in her monologue, maybe around the phrase, I was spiritually starving, I stopped listening. Not out of rage, not even shock. It was something colder. Like a fuse had blown in the part of my brain that once tried to understand her. I could see her lips moving. I could hear the tremble in her voice, the occasional sniffle, the pauses meant to invite sympathy, but it all sounded like background noise now, distant, almost laughably staged. Because while she talked, my mind started rewinding, and this time I paid attention differently. That Tuesday invoice from Dr. Elliott, charged during a week we never went. She said it was a billing mistake. I shrugged it off. The retreat she took with her coworker Miriam in upstate New York. Miriam had never existed on any team photo, LinkedIn page, or group email. I'd searched once out of idle curiosity. Nada, the therapy notebook I bought her. the leather one with her initials pressed into the front. I never saw it again after January. When I asked about it, she said it was too painful to revisit. And the tone, God, the tone. I remembered the way Dr. Elliot would tilt his head when I said something honest. That smug, performative empathy, like he was watching me flail and wondering how long until I'd figure out I was the punchline. It hadn't been an affair. It was a long con with scented candles and office copays. The worst part? I was funding it. Every session, every Uber to their late night talks, every overpriced latte during their emotionally intimate debriefs billed to the joint account. Her betrayal had a paper trail, neat, itemized, tax deductible. Rachel was still talking, now spinning something about how human connection isn't linear and we can love more than one person at a time. She actually said that. I remember because she used it to defend not just her affair with Elliot, but some vague reference to brief emotional comfort from a colleague. So, 2 affairs, at least. One professional, one conveniently timed. But here's the kicker. She never asked what I thought. Not once. She didn't stop to check if I was okay. Because this wasn't a dialogue, this was a purge. She wanted to feel lighter, unburdened, clean. I wasn't a person in that room. I was a confession booth without a priest. She paused, finally, and looked at me with the eyes of a woman who thinks she's just performed open-heart surgery on her soul. "You're very quiet," she said. "I'm just thinking," I replied. "About what?" "About how stupid I've been," I said calmly, "and how deliberate you've been." Her face tightened. "It wasn't deliberate. You don't know what it's like to feel ignored." "No, Rachel. I don't know what it's like to screw my marriage counselor in a Marriott. You're right about that." She looked away. "Guilty? No. Just annoyed I wouldn't soften the blow with humor or understanding. That I wasn't offering her some poetic olive branch to wrap all this in a bow." I stood and walked over to my filing cabinet, top drawer, the one labeled House. Inside was a folder I hadn't touched in 4 months. A stack of receipts I started collecting around the time her lies got lazier. She'd tell me she was working late, but the timestamps on those credit card charges said otherwise. Twice she bought drinks at a jazz bar I knew she hated. Once she left her Apple Watch charging and forgot its synced location. Guess where she went? Right. Elliot's private practice. On a Sunday. I didn't confront her back then because I didn't need fireworks. I needed a record. Call it instinct. Call it the slow-cooked paranoia of a man who still pays attention even when his wife assumes he's too passive to notice. That smug tone from Elliot wasn't imagined. That glance he gave me when Rachel smiled too wide at his jokes. That wasn't professionalism. That was possession. And it hit me like a gut punch. This wasn't just betrayal. It was grooming. He'd watched our marriage unravel, and instead of helping, he took notes and picked his moment. He built his little cult around Rachel's need for attention. He rewrote my flaws into his opportunities, and she let him, willingly. "Were you ever going to stop?" I asked quietly, not even sure why I said it out loud. Rachel froze. She didn't have an answer. That silence told me everything I needed. I turned back to the cabinet, the real one, not the metaphorical one she'd dragged us through. I knelt down, opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years, and pulled out a fireproof lockbox. Combination? 0722. Our wedding date. How poetic. "I want to show you something," I said, my voice calm now. Not angry, not sad, prepared. Her face had been strangely composed through most of it. All the lies, the tangled justifications, the neat little timeline of emotional starvation and accidental connections. She delivered it like she was reading off a weather report. Cloudy with a chance of infidelity. She'd cried earlier, sure, but that was performance. Wet eyes, dry heart. She was still steering the story, still pretending she could narrate her way to redemption. But when I asked that one question, "Were you ever going to stop?" something cracked. The room went still. Her hands, which had been wringing that tissue to shreds for an hour, suddenly froze in her lap. She looked down at them like they might answer for her. She started, then swallowed. Her voice lost its shape. "I don't know." And just like that, the act was over. That sentence, those 3 flimsy words, stripped everything bare. She hadn't come here to confess because she regretted anything. She came because she had to. Something, somewhere forced her hand. A pregnancy scare, maybe, or a whisper from one of her affair partners that things might not stay secret forever. Whatever the reason, this wasn't courage, it was containment, and her plan had just collapsed. I stood up slowly, not for drama. I just didn't feel like sitting anymore. I walked out of the room, past her hunched form, and opened the hallway closet. The second shelf held an old fireproof safe we hadn't used in years, back when we actually shared things like finances, passwords, and a future. The safe was heavier than I remembered. Dusty, too. I carried it into the room and set it on the dresser. Rachel stared at it like it might explode. "What is that?" she asked, voice thin. "I want to show you something too," I said. I turned the dial. 0722, our wedding anniversary. Fitting. The lock clicked open with a sound that echoed louder than it should have. I pulled out the contents one piece at a time. A manila folder thick with paper, a flash drive, a sealed envelope, a small notepad filled with dates and initials. Rachel's expression morphed into something new, something not even she could rehearse. Genuine fear. "You kept records?" she whispered. "No," I said, flipping through the folder. "I built records." Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. I placed a few pages in front of her. "This is your charge from the Darlington on May 9th. Says here you got a wellness suite. Meanwhile, I was at my mother's bedside in hospice, remember?" She didn't answer. "Here's a transcript of the voicemail you left that night. You said you were emotionally overwhelmed and just needed to meditate alone. Instead, you booked a couples massage. You even tipped." I raised a hand. Not angrily, just enough. "And this," I continued, "is the receipt for that red scarf you said you lost on the train. Funny thing is, you told me you bought it from a boutique downtown, but it turns out," I flipped to the next sheet, "you got it online, shipped to Elliot's office. Care of you." Her hand flew to her mouth. I wasn't finished. "This," I said, holding up the flash drive, "contains audio. No, I didn't bug you. I didn't need to. You'd be shocked how many voicemails you left on our landline back when you thought I was out of town, or how loudly you spoke on speakerphone in our living room while I was walking the dog." She looked pale now, like blood was retreating. I placed the sealed envelope in front of her last. "And this," I said quietly, "is from Elliot." Her eyes locked on it. What is that?" "Signed statement, dated, notarized." "Why would he?" "Because when I confronted him 2 months ago," I said, "he folded faster than you'd expect. Turns out, therapists who sleep with clients tend to panic when you mention the state board and civil liability." Rachel didn't speak. She couldn't. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. The room felt heavier now, like the oxygen had thickened. "You thought I didn't notice," I said, softer now. "But I did. I just didn't react. That's the part you never understood. I don't yell. I build." She tried to find her voice. "Why didn't you say anything before now?" "Because saying something would have given you the power to spin it, to make it about your emotions, your trauma, your unmet needs. I didn't want your explanations, Rachel. I wanted documentation." She looked like she might vomit or run or cry again, but all she did was sit there, trembling. "You used therapy as a cover," I continued. "You turned healing into cheating. You built a fortress of excuses and thought I'd never see the cracks." "I didn't want to hurt you," she finally whispered. "You didn't want to get caught," I corrected. The reins were in my hands now, and Rachel knew it. Rachel reached for the folder like it was radioactive. Her fingertips brushed the edge but stopped short of opening it, like she knew what lived inside would reshape the version of reality she'd clung to for years. Her eyes searched mine for mercy. I didn't offer any. "You knew?" she said, her voice hoarse, almost inaudible. "No," I replied calmly. "I suspected. So I started documenting." The horror that crossed her face wasn't guilt. It was exposure. Her chessboard had been flipped, and for the first time, she realized I hadn't been a clueless pawn. I'd been watching, waiting, and worse, I'd been organizing. "You kept this?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "I built this," I corrected. "Each time you lied, I filed it away, not because I was planning revenge, but because I needed a record of what reality actually was." I flipped the folder open and walked her through it page by page, like a prosecutor laying out an airtight case. "Phone logs," I said, placing them on the table. "You told me you were at your sister's, but your phone pinged from Elliot's practice twice, once at 11:52 p.m. She said nothing. "These are the bank statements," I continued, sliding them across. "Room service charges billed to our joint card, one labeled dinner for two, while I was out of town for a funeral. You told me you weren't eating, said you had no appetite. She blinked slowly, hands clenching on her lap. This, I said, holding up a printed email, is the auto-confirmation from your so-called team-building retreat in Asheville. It was actually a wine-tasting weekend for couples. You used your work email to RSVP. You even requested the King Suite. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. I pulled out another document. And this is Elliot's confidentiality waiver. Signed, dated, authorizing me to request all non-clinical correspondence. After I confronted him, he cracked like a glass hammer. He didn't want a formal complaint, didn't want the board involved. Rachel's jaw clenched. And this, I said, voice lower now, is the notarized letter he gave me, admitting to a boundary violation. He used that phrase like it softens what he did. She was staring at the papers like they were written in blood. You kept all this, she whispered. How long? Started around the time you bought that second phone, the one you swore was for work emergencies. She flinched. It never rang once, I said. Not in 7 months. Her mask of composure cracked again. I paused for a moment, studying her face. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a dismantling. And she knew it. The woman who'd spent 2 years curating her web of alibis and half-truths now sat in front of a folder that made her entire campaign of deceit look amateur. You thought you were the only one keeping secrets, I said. But while you were managing your lies, I was managing the evidence. She shifted forward, trying to inject some life into her voice. Daniel, I was lost. I didn't plan any of this. Then it's even worse, I replied, because you were careless with something you swore to protect. Me. She looked down at the papers again, her shoulders visibly trembling. I opened the notepad next, the one I'd used to track inconsistencies. Each page was a date, a lie, a contradiction. Red ink circled times when her alibis overlapped, when she was supposedly at therapy but charged coffee 2 towns over, when her Instagram showed her in sweats at home, but the home security logs showed the back door opening at midnight. You really thought you were subtle, I said. You weren't. She rubbed her eyes hard, like she could erase what was happening. Why didn't you stop me? She asked. I tilted my head. You were already gone. I just didn't want to interrupt the performance. Rachel stood abruptly, pacing. Her breathing had changed, short, fast, shallow. Her brain was scrambling, trying to find an exit ramp off a road she'd paved herself. But there were no detours now. Every piece of her story was accounted for, every narrative twist, time-stamped and cross-referenced, and that's what broke her. More than the fact that she'd been caught, it was that her entire affair had been filed and dissected like a failed case study. There was no romantic tragedy here, just data, just facts. You kept all this to ruin me, she said. No, I replied. I kept it to remember who you are, because I knew one day you'd walk in here and try to sell me the cleaned-up version. I closed the folder gently and locked it back in the safe. And now that day's come. She didn't sit back down. She just stood there, staring at the locked safe like it was her tomb. She didn't speak for nearly a full minute. She stood frozen, like someone waiting for a train that had already passed, still staring down the track, convinced something would arrive to save her. That's when I opened the drawer beside the safe and pulled out a separate folder. This one was thinner, black, embossed, elegant. Inside were 7 pages, and one irrevocable truth.
Sit, I told her. Not a command, just efficient. She hesitated, then obeyed. I sat across from her and placed the folder on the table between us. My voice stayed calm, not cold, not angry. I wasn't playing God, I was just closing the file. 6 months ago, I began. I transferred our joint assets into a spousal trust. She blinked. What kind of trust? Discretionary, asset protected, spousal benefit. Irrevocable, I said.
Created under advisory council, bound by my premarital holdings, and funded by liquid capital contributions I made over the last decade, all documented, all legal. She stared at the folder like it had just growled. You can't do that without me, she said, trying to sound sure. You're right. Normally I couldn't, but you waived joint consent rights in 20 when we refinanced the house. It was buried in the 3rd page of the disclosure packet. You initialed it next to the lunch menu we never used. Her jaw moved, but no words came out. I flipped the first page. Clause 4.2 defines spousal contribution, I continued. Emotional equity, time, and transparency. Clause 4.3 introduces what's called emotional malpractice, defined as sustained deception, active concealment of extramarital involvement, and counselor boundary violation during marital conflict resolution. Basically, this exact situation. You wrote that in? No, I said. My attorney did, after I gave him my notes. She was breathing hard now. I saw the flicker behind her eyes, the moment when denial gave way to math. Legal math, the kind that doesn't cry or yell or ask for forgiveness. You always joked that I was obsessive, I added. Turns out, that's just called preparation. She leaned forward. So you're saying what? I don't get half? I shook my head. No, Rachel. I'm saying you don't get anything from the trust. Because it's not revocable. It's triggered by breach. You breached. That's not fair. It's legal, I said. You chose healing. I chose structure. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. And before you ask, I said, yes, this was reviewed by 2 attorneys and a private mediator. No, you don't get a copy of the trust, because you're no longer a beneficiary. She sat back slowly, like the gravity in the room had changed. You did all this behind my back? She whispered. No, I did it in front of your face. While you were too busy narrating your victimhood to see me filing paperwork. She covered her mouth, eyes filling. You think I was going to divorce you with nothing, I said. That I was going to storm out, crash on someone's couch, and let you cry into spa towels while you rinsed off your guilt in my bathtub. She didn't deny it. I tapped the folder. This is why I didn't react when you told me everything, because I'd already protected what mattered, my work, my name, my future. She shook her head slowly. This is cruel. No, I said, this is consequence. The cruelty was weaponizing therapy to get laid. She looked like she might collapse under the weight of it all, not from sorrow, but from the sheer shock that the man she'd written off as passive had quietly fortified every exit. Her voice came out small. So what now? You leave with what you brought in, I said, which was your car, your clothes, and a hairdryer I hate. The air between us was ice, but the fire was all in her eyes now, panic masked as disbelief. Her story had always ended with a second chance, with forgiveness, with me stumbling, then reaching back for her, but this story didn't end with a hug. It ended with a signature, and her name struck from every page that mattered. If you're still with me, subscribe. The most brutal part is still coming. She hadn't planned to tell me. That much was obvious. There was a shift in her posture, somewhere between desperation and that twitchy kind of panic people get when they realize the water's rising and they're the only one without a raft. Her legs started bouncing. Her eyes kept darting to the safe, then to the folder on the table, like some part of her was hoping it would magically evaporate. It didn't. And then she said it quietly, like maybe if she whispered it, it wouldn't count. It wasn't just Elliot. My eyes stayed on hers. No reaction. There was someone else, she said. It was brief, really brief. I didn't say anything. I just leaned back in the chair and waited. She hated silence. Always did. She bit her lip. A coworker. He was going through a divorce and we had this moment. It didn't mean anything. Name? I asked flat. What? Name. Please. She hesitated. Why? Because I like things documented. That's when she realized this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was an inventory. Peter Lang, she said finally, but it was nothing serious, I swear. I stood, walked to the kitchen counter, flipped open my black leather planner. Yes, I still use a planner. Paper never crashes. And pulled a pen from the spine. Peter Lang, I repeated as I wrote. Thank you for confirming. She frowned. You're writing it down? Mm-hmm. For what? 2 months ago, I said, flipping to a marked page. Peter Lang was the secondary signatory on a partnership proposal. He approved a matching grant to a nonprofit I sit on the board of. That made him, at least on paper, a financial collaborator with me. That contract includes a clause about undeclared conflicts of interest, especially personal ones. She paled. Wait, what does that mean? It means, I said, tapping the page, that your coworker just disqualified an entire proposal, retroactively. You're not serious? The foundation is required to perform compliance audits. If a key contributor was having a personal relationship with the spouse of a board member at the time of signing, that's grounds for withdrawal. Daniel, she said, voice cracking, it was nothing. Then it should be easy to explain to his legal team, I said, shrugging. She stared at me like she didn't recognize who I was anymore. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she still thought I was the guy who'd choked down betrayal in exchange for keeping the peace. But I wasn't choking anymore. I was documenting, cleaning house. You're going to destroy his job over this? She asked. No, I said. He did that himself when he mixed business and personal. You just gave me the missing piece. I told you in confidence, she hissed, like she suddenly discovered what consequences feel like. I raised an eyebrow. You told me in desperation there's a difference. Her voice dropped to a whimper. Please don't do this. He has a family. So did I replied. Until you ran it through a paper shredder. She slumped back into the chair, shoulders caving in. Whatever sense of control she had left was gone. Every truth she offered had cost her something, and now she was bleeding leverage with every word. You think I'm a monster, she said. No, I answered. I think you're a liar, and that makes you predictable. Monsters I can't always see coming. She looked like she wanted to stand, to leave, to escape the walls suddenly pressing in on her. But she didn't, because something in her finally understood. Every time she opened her mouth, she made it worse. It wasn't rage that drove me. It was precision. I didn't threaten Peter Lang. I just filed the note. I didn't yell at Rachel. I just turned the screws, one page at a time. Her stories weren't just unraveling. They were becoming liabilities. Every truth she shared wasn't a bridge to redemption. It was a detonator wired to something she hadn't even considered. I had already done the math. And she'd been in the red for a long, long time. At exactly 7 o'clock a.m., while Rachel sat curled on the edge of our couch like a deflated marionette, I walked into the study and closed the door behind me. No slamming, no theatrics, just the soft click of finality. I didn't need space to calm down. I needed signal strength and a legal pad. The call connected on the second ring. Daniel, said Walter, the foundation chair. His voice still had that gravelly Dawn coffee rasp, but he was always sharp. You all right? Not entirely, I said, but this won't take long. I walked him through it, plain, clinical, zero drama. I explained the nature of the conflict, the involvement of Rachel with a board-adjacent contributor, and how that directly violated our code of ethics regarding influence, nepotism, and improper access to sensitive documents. She had sat in on 2 board dinners, shared rides with donors, helped draft a family-focused initiative proposal last year, one that Peter Lang later reviewed. That alone was enough to trigger an audit. Walter was silent for a beat. You sure you want to go this route? He finally asked. It's not a route, I said. It's maintenance. We both know this would have come up eventually, and when it does, it'll look worse if I'm seen trying to hide it. He sighed. You're right. You always were more precise than people gave you credit for. I try not to leave messes, I said, eyeing the closed door behind me. She'll be withdrawn from active participation effective immediately, he confirmed. Pending formal review. Thank you, I said. Make sure the board minutes reflect that I'm recusing myself from the vote, but that I did initiate the conflict disclosure. He chuckled grimly. You've already drafted the memo, haven't you? Emailed 2 minutes ago. And the Lang contract? Null. Conflict of interest by definition. The Foundation's counsel will confirm it. Walter paused again. This isn't about revenge, is it? No, I said flatly. It's about hygiene. That made him laugh. A short, low one. You always did like your house clean. I like my name cleaner. I hung up. Rachel was still in the living room, eyes fixed on the floor like it might tell her how this ends. The woman who once stood in front of gala audiences and toasted resilience was now biting the inside of her cheek, waiting to see how many dominoes she'd set in motion with one reckless move. She looked up when I re-entered. Who was that? She asked, already knowing the answer. Walter. Her throat bobbed. You reported me to the board? She asked, voice rising slightly. No, I disclosed a conflict. Big difference. She stared at me like she was watching someone slowly turn into a stranger. I supported that foundation for 9 years, she said, and compromised it in 5 minutes. Her mouth opened, ready to launch some moral Hail Mary, but nothing came out, because deep down, she knew. She'd crossed a line she didn't even realize existed, because she'd never taken the time to read the fine print on integrity. She thought it was just something you said at fundraisers, not something that came with consequences. This is humiliating, she whispered. I tilted my head. No, Rachel, this is structure. You still think I'm trying to destroy you. I'm not. I'm just cutting off the rot before it spreads. She stood now, slowly, like her body had aged 10 years in the last 4 hours. You're not the man I married. I was, I said. You just stopped recognizing him when he stopped bending. She took a shaky breath. So what now? Now, I said, we keep moving. I finish cleaning house. You figure out how to explain to your coworkers why your name's missing from next month's gala program. A long silence passed between us. Then she sat back down, quiet, small. And I walked into the kitchen to make coffee, not because I needed it, but because the machine still worked. Something in this house had to. She didn't move. Rachel sat there like gravity had doubled, her spine curved forward, hands limp between her knees. The living room, once her domain of scented candles and curated throw pillows, had turned against her. The air was sharp now, surgical. The silence wasn't an absence, it was an audit. Every breath she took seemed to echo, loud and fragile. So that's it? She finally asked. Her voice was soft, but not broken, just confused, like someone who'd followed a map and couldn't accept that the destination was a cliff. You're just done? I stood at the edge of the hallway, watching her like someone watches the last seconds of a timer. I didn't need to say anything elaborate. She'd asked for clarity. I gave it. I was done, I said, the moment you started narrating your betrayal like a TED Talk. She flinched. That's not fair. No, I agreed, but it's accurate. Rachel straightened up, trying to find some shape again. Look, I was scared, okay? I felt invisible. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. Right, I said. So you found a therapist who talked back, and a coworker who talked dirty. Her eyes widened. That was the first time I said it out loud. The second betrayal. No more quiet note-taking, no more folders, just the truth, spoken, uncloaked, and unemotional. She shook her head. It wasn't like that. Rachel, I said, everything is exactly like that. She stood, her voice rising, trying to match the height of her desperation. We can fix this. I'll quit the foundation. I'll go back to counseling, real counseling. I'll give you access to everything. Please don't throw 20 years away. You already did, I replied. She took a step toward me. You can't mean that. You can't just walk away like none of it mattered. Oh, it mattered, I said. That's why I'm walking away. I moved to the door. My hand found the handle. I didn't slam it open. I didn't yell for her to leave. I just opened it. Wide, clear, final. She didn't come toward it. She stared at it like it was some kind of moral test. You're not even going to try? She asked. After all we've built? You didn't build it with me, I said. You built it next to me. While I was laying bricks, you were drawing exits. She was trembling now, the cracks showing in full. But I love you, she said weakly, like the words were supposed to mean more just because they were said under duress. Maybe, I replied, but not in a way that counts. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. I stepped aside. She didn't move. I waited. Eventually, she picked up her bag. The same black leather one she used for solo weekends and quick getaways. I wondered how many times it had held her lies folded up neatly beside travel-sized toothpaste and a burner phone I probably never found. She walked to the door slowly. At the threshold, she turned. Her eyes red, face pale, posture wilted. I just thought we'd survive this, she whispered. Some things, I said, aren't broken. They're just revealed. She stepped out. I didn't watch her walk down the path. I didn't need to. The house felt louder without her in it. Not emptier, cleaner. She thought this was a pause, a test, that I was bluffing. But this wasn't a detour. It was her ending. And I made sure the door shut behind her. Quiet, certain, complete. She parked in the same grocery store lot where she'd once sat for 20 minutes rehearsing how to tell me she needed space during the early days of therapy. A week ago, she had walked out of our house with an overnight bag, a shaky exit plan, and a belief deep down that I'd fold, that I'd text by day 3, that I'd apologize maybe for being too cold, too quiet, too stubborn. The envelope came that morning. Certified, signature required. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected it to feel this real. Rachel sat in the driver's seat, fingers trembling around the edge of the thick white envelope. The return address was my attorney's. She knew it before she even tore it open. But it wasn't the legalese that made her hands shake. It was the note tucked inside, not typed, handwritten, just one line. You told the story. I just let you finish it. The words hit with surgical coldness. No anger, no bitterness, just precision. That's what unnerved her. That's what finally made it real. The envelope held two things: legal confirmation of our financial separation, filed, notarized, and now irreversible, and a breakdown of the final asset divisions. She could keep the car, her half of the furniture, the artwork from the hallway she always loved, but the trust was untouchable. The investments were cleanly severed. The shared accounts were closed. There was nothing left to split. Rachel sat in that parking lot for 43 minutes, not crying, not screaming, just still. Because it wasn't rage settling in her chest, it was the weight of understanding. There wouldn't be a reconciliation arc, no climactic argument followed by a drunken phone call months later, no shared holiday awkwardness, no unexpected lunch where we talk like adults. There was no part two. And across town, I was sitting in a conference room, shaking hands with a nonprofit director while a notary verified documents. I had just finalized a donation equal in amount to what I gave Rachel for her startup 8 years ago. The seed money she'd pitched as her big dream, the venture that fizzled out in under a year while she found herself. Only this time, the money wasn't going to her. It was going to a support initiative for men, specifically men recovering from emotional abuse, manipulation, and boundary violations inside marriages where they were made to feel crazy for noticing the cracks. A space for the men who didn't scream, who didn't throw things, who didn't storm out, but who were slowly erased by people who knew how to smile while lying. I signed the check, stamped the papers. The foundation director shook my hand and asked, "Do you want this donation to carry a name?" I smiled. "No, let the silence carry it." Back at the house, I packed the last of the framed photos into a storage bin. Not to erase the past, just to clear the walls. The bedroom was quieter now, cleaner. The absence wasn't hollow, it was honest. Rachel would never understand that. To her, the end of a marriage should have sounded like screaming. Slammed doors, messy breakdowns. But ours didn't end with an explosion. It ended with documentation, with quiet boundaries, with steps measured, with a final door that didn't creak when it closed. She had narrated our unraveling like a confession, like she was the victim of a circumstance she built brick by brick. She told her story like it would save her, but stories don't save people. Actions do, and while she performed her monologue, I rewrote the ending. Not for her, for me.